Our second video on surface area and volume is going to be about prisms. So, a prism is a polyhedron with two congruent parallel faces called bases. So there's two bases that are kind of facing each other and they're parallel. The other faces are called lateral faces. So these are kind of like our side faces. And we name a prism using the shape of its bases. So here's three examples. We have a triangular prism because notice we have these two triangle bases that are parallel to one another. Then we have a rectangular prism because we have two rectangular bases that are parallel. And it just so happens that the other sides, the lateral faces, are also rectangles in this case. And last up, we have a pentagonal prism. So look at, we have two pentagons as our bases and they're parallel to one another. So next up, the surface area of a prism is the sum of the lateral area plus the area of the two bases. So we can also just describe this as the sum of all the faces. The units for surface area are going to be just like we did for area. They're going to be units squared, so inches squared, centimeters squared, etc. So for our first example, we have this prism, and notice it's a triangular prism because the parallel bases are triangles. And we need to find the surface area. So the first thing that we have to do is figure out what we're working with. So if we take our triangles, we have a triangle in the front, and we have another triangle that's hidden in the back. So the first thing we realize is that we have two triangles. Next up, we have these lateral faces, but some of them might be different from one another. So let's take our highlighter. We have this first one that's kind of laid on top. So let's call this our yellow rectangle. So we have one yellow rectangle. And now we have two more sides. So let's take our highlighter and look at this left side. So this is the one all the way to the left side. So that's our red triangle, and it really helps to label with colors. And last up, let's take our green highlighter. We have our base on the bottom. So that is another green rectangle, and we need to figure out the surface area. So we need to figure out the areas of these different shapes. So first off, our triangle. Both of these triangles have a width of 4 and a height of 3. So remember, our area is 1/2 base times height. So our area is 1/2 times 3 times 4, which will give us 6. Next up, we need to figure out our yellow rectangle. So our yellow rectangle is actually a little bit tricky because we know that it is base times height, and we know our base is 7, but we're not so sure about our height. But notice this height right here, h, is the hypotenuse of this right triangle. If we have a right triangle, we can use Pythagorean Theorem, so we can say 3 squared plus 4 squared equals h squared, which means that 9 plus 16 is h squared, which means 25 is h squared. So finally we figure out our height is 5. So our height is 5, we multiply by 5 to get 35. Now we have two more rectangles actually left. So we have this red rectangle. So our rectangle area is base times height, which is 3, and then this height is 7, so we get 21. Finally, we have our green base on the bottom. Our green is base times height, which will be 4 times 7, which is 28. Last up, we have to add up the total. So our total is 2 of the rectangles plus all of our, 2 of the triangles plus all of our rectangles. and we find that is 96 units squared, which is centimeters squared. So there is our total surface area. Lastly, we have volume. And volume is the space that a figure occupies and is measured in cubic units. So what that means is units cubed. So our volume is going to be the area of the base times the distance between the bases. We typically think of volume as length times width times height. So that's area of the base times this height in between. So if we are trying to figure out the volume of this prism, what we're going to do is take the area of the triangles, well, we just need one, times the distance between them. So luckily we already figured out our area of our triangles is 6. So 6 times the distance between them, well, the distance between them is 7 centimeters. So we'll take 6 times 7, and we'll get 42, and now it's centimeters cubed because we're working with volume. And there's how we find the volume of this prism.